You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. What holds you together when your child's needs leave little room for your own? Join me for today's profound journey. This episode contains adult subject matter, and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. Caring for a child with complex medical needs reshapes every part of life, the routines, the relationships, and the future you once imagined. In this episode, we hear from a mother who lives that reality every day, balancing advocacy, medical decision-making, and the emotional weight that comes with being a medical mom. She shares what this journey has looked like for her family and how it continues to shape who she is. Sarah Michelle Boes is the founder of Sarah Michelle NP Reviews and currently serves as the Chief Nursing Officer at Blueprint Test Prep and new board member for Conquering CHD starting January 2025, and a committee chair member for the Children's Heart Foundation annual Cincinnati Walk. With a robust educational background, including a BSN from the University of Kentucky and an MSN in nursing education from Western Governors University, Sarah has extensive experience in oncology, intensive care, and nursing education. In 2020, she launched SMNP Reviews, an innovative platform that rapidly grew to a 7-figure business within 7 months. Following SMNP Reviews' acquisition by Blueprint in 2022, Sarah transitioned to a role where she continues to oversee the nursing vertical and integrate cutting-edge educational technologies. Sarah's entrepreneurial journey is deeply intertwined with her personal life. Her daughter, Meadow, born with severe heart defects, has required extensive medical care, inspiring Sarah's commitment to pediatric cardiac research and care. In recognition of Meadow's journey, Sarah and her husband are making a $15 million legacy donation to Norton Children's Hospital, where the new Congenital Heart Center will be named in their honor. This contribution underscores their dedication to improving healthcare for children with congenital heart conditions. Beyond her business success, Sarah is a passionate advocate for mental health and female entrepreneurship. Her own experiences with anxiety and OCD have fueled her mission to help others manage mental health challenges, particularly within high-stakes environments like healthcare. She leverages her platform to support female entrepreneurs and promote awareness about the importance of mental well-being in professional settings. Here is my interview with Sarah Michelle Boes. Hi, Sarah. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because caring for a chronically ill child and yourself is such an important topic, and I feel like there will be many listeners that can relate to that are experiencing that in their own lives. So thank you for joining us today and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to share about my daughter and our story and kind of what our life has looked like the last couple of years.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes this is a really hard thing for people to share or to talk about because it is very emotional, very vulnerable, and very personal. So I thank you for coming here and sharing that. I feel like this is going to touch a lot of lives. So for starters, do you want to maybe share a bit of the beginning of the journey or what you think is a relevant part of the journey and how that connects to where you're at today and maybe a little bit about what it is that you do today?
Yeah. I often tell people these days, because it's just so genuinely true, that I feel like I've lived 5 lifetimes in the last 5 years. And so when COVID hit, I was in the process of finishing nurse practitioner school, and there was so much uncertainty at the time of like, would there be a job available when I graduated? Would I actually be able to take my exam? Like testing centers were closed. Like there was just massive, massive, massive unforeseen amounts of uncertainty and not knowing what was going to happen. But I actually had this really beautiful synergistic moment where right as I was about to graduate nurse practitioner school, I was actually already teaching nursing students and I was teaching clinicals and I was teaching labs and all of that is very much in person. But because of COVID, everything pivoted online and there wasn't really any like guidebook or instructions in the beginning. It was just like, we've got to get these students through school. We've got to make this a meaningful experience. And how are we going to do that? But for me, that was a really nice crash course in how do you teach online? What does that look like? What do students like? And I tell you all this background information because when I finally got to take my nurse practitioner exam, which was rescheduled 5 times, by the way, so much anticipation built up, it was one of the easiest exams I'd ever taken. And so I was like, I had all this massive, massive anxiety about taking this thing because if you're not a medical provider and you've never taken a high stakes exam, just to kind of put it in perspective, like you spend years in school and thousands of dollars of money to get this degree that you will never be able to use if you don't pass this exam. And so for people, this is a really, really, really big deal. And because I had more free time than I'd ever had in my life because everything was shut down, and I had been teaching students online and really figuring out what they liked and what they didn't, I ended up creating a review course for a nurse practitioner board exam. I did it over a weekend in our attic. I just felt really called to do it. I was like, this might not ever go anywhere, but why don't I just like put it out into the world and kind of see what happens? And so I gave it to my first 30 classmates for free. And then I was like, just invite somebody into this Facebook group with me. So I gave it to the first 100 for free. And then the first day that I went to sell it, I sold it for $15, which is nothing for a 3-hour course, lifetime access, all the things. I was not a business owner. Okay. I was a nurse and I was figuring things out as I went, but I made $1,000 that day. And I was like, wow, like I really I don't even come close to making this during a week sometimes as a nurse. Like, what would my life look like if I got to do what I love to do, which is teach, and I got to work from home, which I also was really loving at that point in time, and kind of what could the future of my life look like if I really leaned in here and just did the thing. And so that business really grew beyond my wildest dreams. And if you had asked me while I was creating it, like what the secret sauce was, I would have said, like, the content's better, or things like that. But it was really two things. One, it was building community. And two, especially during COVID, like everybody was looking for community, especially online. But two, it was the mental health aspect because like I firmly believe like if you can graduate a program like that, you can pass the exam, but you have to have kind of your anxiety toolkit built to do that. And you've got to have your resources available. Now, this feels like a very long-winded tangent story. And you're like, how did we get here? I thought you were a medical mom. What's going on right now? And I tell you that story because I went on to sell that business right at the 2-year mark when I was 8.5 months pregnant. It was the highest high of my life. I was so excited. Like, I grew up in very small rural Eastern Kentucky. It's one of the poorest regions of the United States. So to have a big win like that before turning 30 was almost unimaginable. But then I turned and I rode the lowest low of my life because just 3 weeks after that deal closed, when I was 36 weeks pregnant, I found out my daughter was going to have 4 different heart defects. And so we thought we had this totally normal, healthy baby my entire pregnancy. And now our lives are completely upended because when we found out her diagnosis, the first things that we were hearing is like a lifetime's worth of surgery, a lifetime worth of care. And we really kind of had to wrap our heads around what is it like to be a first-time parent, but also what is it like to be a medical parent. And I'm so grateful that I have the background that I do to be able to have the medical expertise for that. But in the last 2.5 years since she's been born, we have rode quite the medical journey, and it was very different than the business building, very exciting journey. I mean, not that being a parent is not exciting, but it's had a different flavor. And so love sharing about our story with people. One, because I just want to set it straight right now, because sometimes when I talk about Meadow, people assume she is dead. She is not. Meadow is alive and healthy and beautiful. She's the healthiest she's ever been. But heart defects are the most common birth defect, but one of the least funded. And that's really a lot of the work that I do today now that she is healthy.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that and taking us on that side tangent of
Wild
your
journey.
journey. Yeah, because I feel like in a way, did that give you some tools to prepare you for, having your daughter and going through that journey with her? I feel like a lot of the tools that you put together for anxiety and mental health for that exam could potentially help when you are dealing with a chronically ill child. So, did that journey cross in any way after your daughter was born? Did that help you at all, what you had prepared for in your business?
I think yes and no, because the other part of the story that kind of simultaneously goes along my daughter's story is my entire life I've had this big, massive anxiety, and I've had test anxiety. I've had different things and different ways to deal with that. But actually, when she was 6 months old and we finally made it out of the ICU for good and we came home, I just could not function any longer. Like my anxiety had grown so much, and I really had become so obsessive about her care and her outcomes and all the things. And like in some ways, how could I not? Like I had the medical expertise. We had lived in the hospital for 5 months, all these things, right? But I actually found out when we got out of the hospital that I had obsessive compulsive disorder. And for people that don't understand what that is, they think it's compulsive hand washing, which is a piece of an OCD journey. But my OCD journey did not look like that at all, which is why I had the wrong diagnosis for so long. And so when she was 6 months old, I was able to learn an entirely new skill set of how to manage myself and manage my brain, which was really beautiful. And I think the best thing that the business gave me, and especially the sell of the business, was the flexibility to explore that and to have the time and the resources to be able to do that, because I ended up having to do an intensive outpatient program to really kind of reset my OCD brain and rejoin real life and become a normal human again that could be a really great mom to my daughter.
Yeah, I can only imagine that part of the journey as someone who is maybe really well supported and not struggling with mental health. That already is a very difficult part to care
For
for
sure.
chronically ill child, but then to also work with your own mental health in addition to that, it seems like a lot of strain and a lot of heartbreak that goes into that as you're trying to figure out all the different pieces. So tell us a little bit about what that was like for you mentally, emotionally, to be in the hospital for that long with your child and worrying about her and her health, and at the same time having to figure out your own mental health, struggling with the OCD and figuring out a new skill set to learn. What was that like for you? What was that experience like for you?
I think the initial hardest part, and something I still figure out how I'm going to cope with today, is the reality versus the expectations part of the conversation. Because when you envision becoming a mother, you do not envision living in the ICU. And so trying to like bridge that gap of how do we end up here? This is not what I thought it was going to be. And not that I don't love being a mom, but I mean, living in the ICU for that long just is very much a place of grief and mental fatigue and overwhelm and just being over capacity when you imagined you would be at home holding a newborn and kind of like soaking all of those things in. What I tell people all the time that don't understand what OCD actually is, at its core, it's an inability to tolerate uncertainty. So you want the guarantee, you want the certainty. And for me, my daughter is my biggest lesson in uncertainty all the time. And that's initially why my OCD kind of spiraled out of control. Because with the set of heart defects that she has, she will have more surgeries throughout her life. And so her lingering piece today is she has a fake heart valve. Every time she grows exponentially, she essentially outgrows the valve. And so that means she will have to have open heart surgeries to replace that. but we never know when that is. Like, it's not like there's a set protocol of when Meadow turns 5, it's time to do the vow, or when Meadow turns 10. It's really subjective and strategic and based on her. But for someone that can't tolerate that uncertainty, then what that can spiral into is all these compulsive behaviors of like, for me, I did so much checking with Meadow. I'm like, do her lips look blue? What does her oxygen look like? Because so basically what happened when she had her first heart surgery at 6 days old, and it went way better than anyone could have anticipated, which was wonderful. And we lived close enough to our children's hospital that we were actually to have like able to have some home time. So we brought home this very sick baby and then basically made our home a hospital-like environment. And we had oxygen monitors and scales, and we had to report in every day and all these things. But it became all of this data that now my brain was tracking, and that's what she needed. But when she went through her second set of surgeries and we eventually made it home, it was really hard to let those things go because that was our routine and that was our pattern. And that's how, in my brain, she was safe. And so for them suddenly to say, like, oh, I know like the last 6 months she's been really sick, but she's fine now, my brain just couldn't reconcile that. And so I still wanted to do all of those behaviors. And then the other like flavors or themes of OCD that really get me when my OCD is bad is magical thinking. So if I don't do this thing, something bad will happen to my daughter, and also thoughts of harm as well. I got to a point where I was literally so petrified of knives because I was like, what if I accidentally drop it? What if I like stab her? What if I stab myself? And the other thing is too, like, these are things you don't want to do. They're the last thing you want to do, actually, but you're just so inundated with all these thoughts that I got to a point I couldn't even pick up a butter knife anymore. Like, all knives were bad. And that's when, I got that diagnosis. I was like, I'm going to have to really tackle this in a unique way because this is running every area of my life. And I can't even comprehend how to like show up and be a mom and be present anymore.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot that you were shouldering, and the uncertainty that already doesn't work for people
Endless uncertainty.
who don't have OCD. That
Yeah.
adds to all of that. And how did you begin coping with that? How did you choose the first steps to take, or were you able to find support, or was it self-driven that you were starting off, or how did your journey with OCD continue, and how did you support yourself, or how did you care for yourself in that instance?
It was funny when I was pregnant. I was talking to a friend one time and I said something, and she's a therapist, by the way. And she was like, oh, like, what are you doing to manage your OCD? And I was like, what are you talking about? I don't have OCD. And at this point, I was probably 6 months pregnant. I did a little like research in the OCD, and I remember like asking my husband, like, do you think I have this? But we decided that at 6 months pregnant was probably not a great time to get a new diagnosis. So I was like, let me have the baby. Let me sell the business. We were in the midst of selling the business. That was a big, huge process. And then like, we'll figure this out later and kind of revisit this. And so by the time that we had made it out of a hospital with my daughter, I kind of looked into it again because I was like, I've always had kind of like wild, intrusive thoughts, but never to this extreme. And maybe this OCD thing is real. So, I mean, within a week of our daughter leaving the hospital, I had an appointment with an OCD specific therapist just to be like, can we do the assessment thing? Because if there's anything that will help me sleep and eat and function right now, if it's this diagnosis, like I will graciously accept that. And when I did the assessment scale, it's a scoring system of 0 to 40, and I scored a 37. So I was in the extreme category, which is fine. I can own that. But that's how I ended up doing that outpatient program, which is where you do 4 to 6 hours of therapy every day for 5 days a week for about a month, month and a half. You have 4 different therapists during that time. But the goal is, because you do this really intense, condensed setting, that you really see a massive reduction in OCD symptoms, which I definitely did. So because I knew nothing about OCD outside of just compulsive hand washing, which I didn't have, I really worked in that program to be able to build up my OCD toolkit and not just anxiety in general. Because the other thing about OCD and something that really gets me and I have to be careful of too is reassurance seeking. And so, you know, I might look at my daughter one day and ask my husband, like, do you think she looks good today? And like, he doesn't know if her heart looks good today. He doesn't like, we don't have any like scales of like what her health looks like. And he'll be like, yeah, she looks fine. But then like OCD becomes this really insatiable thing of like, I might ask again, I might ask 5 times, those sorts of things. And so even just having the awareness of the symptoms to then be able to kind of stop them in their tracks. Because now, like, if I ask my husband, I'm like, you think Meadow looks healthy today? He's like, okay, am I talking to you or am I talking to your OCD right now? But really, awareness and the OCD specific strategies were what allowed me to kind of re-enter real life.
That sounds really fascinating how you're describing that once you become aware of it, you can actually work with that. So
Yeah.
that is I think a really great thing so that that self-awareness helps with the
Well, it's
self-care.
hard when you don't know what it is and you
Yeah.
can't name the thing. Like it's a totally different experience versus like you're like, oh, this is OCD and I know what I'm looking for. And if I know what I'm looking at, I know how to manage it, or at least I can try to manage it.
Yeah. That's really great insight. Thank you for sharing that. Now, I'm curious because you're not going through this journey alone. You also have your husband. And how does that affect the dynamic in a relationship when you care for a chronically ill child together? And in addition to that, you're managing your mental health. How does that impact the dynamics of a relationship or a marriage, or even if you have siblings or your parents? How does that change that relationship when this happens?
I feel like we've had to rework a lot of dynamics amongst ourselves, amongst our family, because with our parents, for example, who I love and I adore, when they think about Meadow and her diagnosis, they often like they're like, "What's the bright side? Like, what's the bright spot? Like, what could we be working towards?" And sometimes I just have to remind them that like I don't always want solutions. Sometimes I just want support. And so that's actually a line that we use all the time with our families is like, I want support today or I want solutions today. And really being able to gear the conversation in that way to hold space for grief because grief is uncomfortable and weird and strange and vulnerable and all the things. And then really kind of the interesting part, like, between us is I've kind of always been the one that's had more mental health stuff, and that's okay. And that was a dynamic of our relationship. But it was interesting for me to my husband now to have his own mental health stuff and his own PTSD, and like, how are we going to navigate that? And what does that look like? And then for me to simultaneously get a massive mental health diagnosis of OCD because things like reassurance seeking were so baked into our relationship. We had been together almost a decade at that point, and like that was how he used to support me was by providing all this reassurance. I remember the first week of my OCD treatment. It makes me laugh now, but he was like so afraid of giving me reassurance that he just stopped talking to me altogether. And I was like, I understand where you're coming from, but being silent is not helpful. So like how do we like find the middle ground? Which is for us, a lot of how we manage my OCD together is through humor. So when he says stuff like, am I talking to you or am I talking to your OCD right now? Like it brings some levity to something that can feel really serious and really hard.
Yeah, and I guess the key is communication for that so that
Always.
you can express what would be helpful. He can express, am I helping or what do I need now? So,
Yeah.
yeah, communicating through that, being really open with each other.
And honestly, just over communicating too. Like, I feel like you almost can't communicate enough when you're
Mhm.
navigating a situation that big, not only between you, but between your friends, your family, all the things.
How do you manage that your daughter doesn't sort of become you and your husband, that it doesn't become just all of you or everything that just goes on? By that, I mean, how do you take care that you also still have family relationships? You maybe have some social time, or you do hobbies or things you enjoy. Because I feel like having a bit of that balance, although that may be really hard in those situations, might help with your mental health. So, how do you take care that this doesn't overtake everyone's lives to 100% capacity.
I think about that a lot actually, because now my daughter's getting older and I do a lot of advocacy work for congenital heart disease, which is beautiful and amazing. But I sometimes worry, I'm like, how do I make sure that her heart defects don't become her entire identity? Like, there's so many more cool parts of Meadow than her heart defects. And that's something we're definitely navigating all the time. But I think, like, when you're in the thick of it. So if your child is in the ICU, that's just survival. You just have to get through that moment. You don't really have capacity for all the extra things that you need or want to do, just to be honest. Like you survive that moment and then you can figure it out. And so for us, we really spent the year after we came out of the hospital rebuilding like what our normal looked like and what we wanted our life to look like and what were our hobbies and like how could we start to separate ourselves from Meadow a bit. We have a full-time nanny who I love and I'm so grateful for. But when she first started, like it was hard for me to leave the house. Like I just wanted to be around Meadow all the time and make sure she was safe and all the things. You know, over time with that lived experience, you're like, oh no, she's going to be okay. Like, we're going to be okay. Like, we can live our lives. But that in itself is its own journey of like building up your comfort level. Cause I think maybe Meadow, gosh, it was probably 4 or 5 months our nanny had been with us. She asked to take her to the zoo. And I said yes. But then my husband was like, I don't know about that. Like, them leaving the house, like all this stuff. And I'm like, at a certain point, we have to let Meadow live her life and we can't treat her like a sick baby all the time or like she's going to ingrain that as part of her identity. And for me, that's the last thing that I want for her.
Yeah, those are really good points. And I guess there is some learning to again live with that uncertainty. You can't control every moment of the her life or even her condition or her illness. So yeah, I can imagine that being quite complicated. And what helps you navigate these challenges? What have you found? Maybe also if there are listeners who are parents to a chronically ill child or injuries or disabilities, what have you found the most helpful for you in this journey and supporting yourself and supporting your child? Do you have some insights for our listeners on that?
I think there is just so much insanely abundant gratitude that comes from having a sick child because our daughter during her second surgery, she nearly died at one point. And so like to have that experience and then come out of the hospital and she gets to be a real kid. I hate to say a normal kid because she's never totally normal, but she has like a chance and opportunity to live her life because of that experience we had though, and because of the gratitude we have. I feel like we get to lean in so much more and we really try to lean in the ways that are things that are accessible to her, things that light her up, because the more she's lit up, the more that we are lit up. And so, for example, like when Meadow came out of the hospital and she had all this really intense like chest scar tissue, like she was really behind on her milestones. And for me, that was hard because I'm a nurse practitioner and I know what I'm supposed to be seeing and I'm not seeing it from my kid. But kind of leaning into too, like whatever things you can control. My husband used to joke that I was her like personal physical therapist, but we would do little baby exercise that I looked up online. We did mommy and me swim classes because that's something we could do together that she could move her body even as a baby. So there's like all these different like loopholes and maneuvering that you can do to lean into like what can my child do? What are they capable of today? How can I meet them where they're at? Because I think that's really the core thing I'm trying to say is meet your child where they're at, lean in really hard to that, and have a lot of fun with it.
And I'm sure that she's going to grow up being a really blessed child in that sense that you're trying to give her this sort of normal life despite all the circumstances. I think that she will really, really appreciate that too when she's older. Now, for you personally, what have you found most helpful for your own support, for your own care, for your mental health care, for working with your anxiety, with OCD? What has been most supportive for you? What has been most helpful? Were those activities or remedies, or what have you found that has supported you best?
I feel like for everyone, this path is a little bit different. I know it's different for me and my husband because my husband channeled kind of like all of his energy into building a business. And that's what he's been doing the last couple of years. And that's incredible and that's cool. But I've had that experience and it's not the experience I want right now in this moment. But for me, at the heart of my business, I was an educator and a teacher and a creator, and I really love creative outlets. And so I've just been dabbling in a bunch of different hobbies and seeing what I enjoy because that's fun for me. Like I'm dabbling in watercolor right now. I have tarot cards. I'm a part of a healing circle. Like I do some like alternative or adjunct things that just make me feel good and feel good about myself. And I hate to ever give the advice of exercise because I feel like that feels really prescriptive. But for me, not exercise, but moving my body is important. So even if that's just a 20-minute walk or doing like some low impact Pilates or something like that, like that's a really integral and core part of my day and me feeling like my best self. So I think what people have to find is like once you survive, what are your capacity builders? And when I paint, it's capacity builder. When I go for a quick walk, it's a capacity builder. And then I get to show up as my best self for my daughter.
Yeah. And you're right. We can't one size fits all for everyone listening, but I think these are some very foundational pieces that you're mentioning that I think would go a long way for many, many people who are in that same situation. So those are great creative outlets. That's wonderful. And just finding a bit of that time that recharges your batteries because the rest of the time you are giving a lot and you're expending a lot of that energy. So
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I mean, it sounds like cliche to be like, go on a walk and paint, but like those are things that genuinely make me feel better about myself.
Yeah. How important is community in this whole journey? I feel like especially in the medical field, there is a place where people are often left very alone. They don't know what's happening, or I mean, in your case, you were very educated about the medical field, but there's a lot of people that have absolutely no idea. So when their child is chronically ill, this is a completely new thing for them. How important is finding support or community or some kind of even online community or a parent circle or support with what is going on with your child and with yourself?
I love to have both types of community. And so what I mean by that is I like to have typical parent community and I like to have medical parent community because that's something that at the end of the day, I am a first time mom and I'm a medical mom. And like those experiences come together for me. But through a lot of my advocacy work and championing congenital heart disease, because it is the most common birth defect and it is one of the very least funded, I find so much just like purpose and joy to be able to talk to other heart moms. We call each other heart parents, so heart moms and heart dads, and be able to just show up, talk to people, and people not have to explain themselves, and vice versa. Because when you are a heart parent or a medical parent, and someone has a similar experience to you, like that level of not having to explain it, not having to hide the grief, not trying to bury things down like you do with normal people is really important and really, really validating. And so I feel like I'm constantly seeking out that kind of like medical parent community. I'm at the part of like, gosh, probably 3 or 4 different congenital heart disease organizations at this point, just trying to like figure out exactly what that looks like for me. And then more of like in my real world, day to day, like there is a toddler gym that's 20 minutes from my house, and they do daily toddler like gymnastics and playtimes and all that. And I love to go just be around other parents and other children and really get that more like human to human connection I don't always get with medical parents because medical parents could be all across the world. But I like having some local home connections and like some other toddlers from Meadow to be friend with and build her own community. Like that's really special and really important to me too.
Yeah. It sounds like that can be a part of the healing journey and a part of that support as you go forward with that. Yeah.
Well, it was huge the first time we went to the toddler gym because I was like, is this safe? Can she do this? Is
Yeah.
she capable? All this stuff. And she just fit right in. I was like, oh, like we treat her like a heart baby, but she's just a normal kid underneath it all.
Yeah. I guess that must just really fill your heart to see her
Oh,
playing and
she
then just being
literally
a
last
normal kid.
weekend, she's like hanging off of a swinging bar. She's like climbing ladders, all this stuff. Like she has no idea. And I love that.
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful part of it is bringing back a bit of that normalcy. Yeah.
Yeah, for as long as we can.
Absolutely. Now, you also have a few resources to share with our listeners, and maybe there are people listening in who have a chronically ill child or are caring for a chronically ill child, and they might be facing some difficulties in their own lives and their relationships, their own mental health. So, what kind of resources do you have available?
Often, what I tell people to do is just connect with me because once I hear your story, I know what resource works best for you. And I have a lot of them. So I don't want to just direct you to one place and be like, here you go. So the easiest way to connect with me is to go to my website, sarahmichelleboes.com. That's spelled Boes. I have a whole Heart Mom page of my website, but I'm also on pretty much every social media platform at this point. I actually do a lot of writing because that helps me process my grief too. Even on places like LinkedIn, which you think might not be mental health or heart mom kind of places, I'm making them those kinds of places. And so just find one path to get a hold of me, and then I can figure out where we need to go next. But I love the human to human connection. It's so important to me.
Amazing. And I'm really grateful that you're okay with people reaching out and connecting with you. I feel like there can be so much confusion and fear and uncertainty, as you mentioned. And it's really, I think, comforting to be able to connect with someone who's going through that journey. So we, of course, will be linking to Sarah's website so you can find out how to connect with her. We'll also link to some of the socials and make sure that our listeners are able to get in touch if they'd like to connect with you or maybe ask some questions or come into community or ask for resources. We'll be sure that we hook them up with that so that they can connect. And thank you so much, Sarah, for joining me today and sharing your journey and your daughter's journey with us. I really appreciate that you are so open and vulnerable about this because it's a hard thing to talk about. And many people, I guess, in that situation also afraid to talk about that because it's emotional, it's painful. You said there's a lot of grief going on. So thank you for joining me today and sharing that.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is part of how I manage my own grief. So I appreciate the opportunity. And if anyone else can listen to this and feel like seen, heard, or validated for even a second, it's always worth it to me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this amazing work you do. All the best to you, your family, and your daughter, of course. And take care, Sarah.
You too.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.